latest episode of the Imperium blog, the Imperium video blog as it were. This is episode 3, where we're moving on from what we've been talking about, all related of course, but we're talking here about the setting of your story. When you're building a world, you have to decide upon a setting fairly early in, is my belief at least, or you decide upon it, I suppose, on the embryonic state of it, but like everything else, it's something that develops, I believe, as the story goes along, just like your characters, which we'll be touching on next week. One of the biggest challenges, I think, that a writer will face is going beyond what I suppose you might call staticism. That in the real world, everything is in constant flux and change. One of the great sayings I enjoy, the only constant in this world is change. And it's quite true. And the whole thing is, the thing that makes things interesting, I believe, especially in the context of the world in which we're living today, is that change always brings about conflict. Take a look at the world we're living in today, especially since this pandemic has risen, and you'll actually see that change has brought about a great deal of existential conflict. Look at all the things that have come into the fore since this has happened. People are resisting the change, people are fighting over the change, there is conflict in a number of different fields that were previously unexpected to some degree. Because the change that's happening is quite significant, it's quite real, it's quite large, and it is both independent of and part of the actual central change which is happening. The change is not, in my opinion, some nefarious, all-controlling world organization that is seeking to alter human society and human government and human general everything. It's a change in here. It's a change in how people are thinking, that the thought processes have been brought about by having to deal with a very altered state in the society of the world, in the way people are thinking, in the way people are having to consider their neighbours, consider the people around them, think about what I suppose you could term as the unthinkable. Because let's be honest, the thought of millions of people just gone like that in the world, just gone, never to return, never to be seen again, never to have been properly buried or had their funerals celebrated according to the culture where they are, and without their families having a chance to say goodbye to them or even see them in their final moments, is something which is impossible. It's on a scale that's impossible for human beings to comprehend. So we have, in some way, as a defensive mechanism, trivialized it and made it out to be some sort of vast conspiracy. The idea is that putting on a face mask when you go onto the street, to some people, is admitting that this is real, is admitting that this terrible force of nature has power, and people are resisting it in order to try and rob it of its power. People like me, for example, who believes that there is, while we don't know the full set of facts, we know enough to know that it's not an invention of some nefarious sect of people we can never, ultra rich people we're never going to meet and they're never going to be able to prove the existence of. It is numbing in its magnitude. It is hard to talk about and acknowledge it, because to do so would be acknowledging our complete powerlessness in front of something so vastly huge, uncaring and unemotional. So it's simpler to... oh yeah, kids' toys behind me, sorry. It's simpler to just simply say, okay, it can be real, this isn't real, I don't believe this. And then you realise somewhere deep inside your psyche that perhaps it is real. Change. You have to, in my opinion, in order to make your story true, change has to be inherent in the very fabric and structure of it. Now, come on, what is one of the central tenets to writing? That your characters must be dynamic, that they must change, they must be interesting, they must evolve and change as the story goes along. To have a two-dimensional hero character who is the same at the beginning of the story as they are at the end is what is most often considered to be poor writing, to be lazy writing. That your character must start off as one thing and must end the story as another, because as the change brings out conflict, and in most cases when you're writing it's going to be an artificial change, as in it's a change that is pushed and exaggerated, an extreme change. You know, as an example, we have the typical trope of what we call the farmer. You must have seen this many times. It was very much used in both Microsoft's Dungeon Siege series and Jason Statham in the film, which that was absolutely bloody awful, was awful in such a great way. You know, come on, we had Burt Reynolds as a king. You can't go far wrong with that one. And Jason Statham being Jason Statham with a sword, which was quite interesting. And we also had Ron Perlman in it, so how can you go wrong with that kind of film? Come on. But it's the idea. He started as an ordinary farmer of nondescript origins, without a name, and he then came to be a great hero, and then he came to be the actual heir to the throne after the king had died. You know, come on, we've used this many times. The Odyssey itself used that. We're going back thousands and thousands of years. It was quite a popular trope in ancient stories that the heir to the throne was hidden away on a pig farm. He became a piggy type, watching over type person and looking after pigs. He developed the odour and the appearance of that, and he later turned out to be the heir to the throne. Everyone immediately recognised as soon as he had a wash. You know how it is. They spent the entire period of his life from early childhood to late adolescence seeing him as the pig farmer, and then the instant he walks into the throne they go, oh, it's the king! How could I not have noticed that before? And okay, it's a terrible trope, it's a repeated trope, it's an often used trope, but it keeps coming back, doesn't it? You know, come on, we've got it very popular in some elements of literature at the moment, of the whole, what do they call it, the Mary Jane, the Mary Stu kind of trope, where we have the abandoned, much ignored, not very attractive, not very popular, in some manners abused kind of person who happens to meet their mentor type figure and discovers they have earth-shattering powers upon which the fate of their planet relies, if they make the right decision and decide to become a hero, and that they alone have the power capable of destroying the great evil person, of destroying everything fame. And they end up becoming vastly popular, vastly happy and joyous, and having a good life and children and all that sort of thing. Now come on, Harry Potter, excuse me Joe, I don't mean to bring you up here at this moment in time, but I can't help it. Harry Potter was the same thing. He was the great hero, the chosen one, who was hidden away and lived in a little room smaller than this one under the stairs in his step-parents' house, or his aunt and uncle's house, and was much maligned, abused, and not given much things, and even denied his destiny, somewhat perhaps in a manner to save his life and as a sense of duty towards his parents, knowing what could happen to him. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? It's constantly popular. People love that. They identify with that. And the answer to the question I'm about to ask is a multi-layered and complex one. Why? Simple. Most people who are living their lives and not achieving their dreams. It's that simple. They feel like there is perhaps some force against them, preventing them from achieving what they wish to achieve, whether it is some hidden nefarious organization that runs the world, some political affiliation which is trying to put down the section of society they feel they belong to, while lifting up the section of society they feel is in opposition to them. There are ethnic, there are racial, there are sexual, there are identification, there are lifestyle, there's a multitude. But these people, this person, feels they belong to one section of society, and that the rest of society is there to minimize them. And in many, many cases, this is actually quite true. There are sections of society that are being minimized, that are being put down, that are being made to feel less important than others. Be it race, where at this very moment in time we are seeing endemic, systemic racism is definitely something that exists. And it is that one section of society is in fear of another section of society having equality to it. Before that, we had a gender problem where women could not vote, women could not work, women could not partake in normal parts of society which men were quite naturally allowed to have. And that was changed. I'm sorry, I've got my children shouting in there outside. I apologise if it's distracting. It's why another reason I wear the headset, you see. But that changed. The idea of inequality of race is changing. It is a slow, a glacial change. But thank whoever it is that is responsible for making decisions on these things, it is changing. And though it is not changing fast enough, it's changing now, I hope. I hope the paradigm is shifting, and that the idea of judging someone because of what colour their skin is or what country their ancestors came from is something that is not unacceptable. We also have at the moment, and I'm touching on this in the Imperium cycle, the idea of gender identity. You know, we have people who feel that the gender they were born to is not the one they belong to. And I can understand this. Though, to be honest, as what is classified as a cisgendered, cis-normal male who identifies as a man and always has, and has lived their life as such, I do find it is a challenge to understand the very complex world in which transgendered people live. Because it's one of those things, if one has not experienced something, if one has not lived it, if one has not grown up in it, if one has not seen it with their own eyes and their own senses, it's hard for one to understand. And I will be honest, I myself object to being labelled as cisgendered, because we've had a famous person, what we could call a cultural icon, has been involved this week in a rather heated discussion about that term, and I'll leave you to look up Bill Shatner's details to know that he has a point, and the people in opposition also have a point. And that's the thing that I feel we are greatly lacking in our society today. The ability to acknowledge that while you may not agree with those who hold an opposing opinion to yours, you can acknowledge that their argument may indeed have a point, that there may be sense to their argument, even though you personally do not feel what they feel and cannot, and that you do not understand the origins of their struggle. You can acknowledge that it is their right to feel that, and under their circumstances, that they have a point. And this is, while a little bit of a tangent runner on my part, it has a point, because one of the hardest things for you to do as a writer is get inside of the head of an individual who may not think the same way you do. We're not just talking in the case of villains, because obviously going to the side of the Imperium, while the villain is an evil, heartless, emotionless bastard of a man, he has a point in his rather warped and twisted fashion. He believes what he is doing is for the benefit of the human race, or at least for his benefit, and the side benefit is the human race will get something out of it. But some of the things that Apotheon is going to do, that he's going to bring into existence, and that he's going to do, that Ataraxius and Atara, the same person, different versions of him, is going to think and believe and do, are going to be totally against everything I believe in, the fabric and core of my being. But I have to somehow get inside of his head and make him a rounded and three-dimensional character, rather than a two-dimensional bomb, this is the evil one, sort of thing. I am evil because I do evil things, sort of thing. I don't want to write a two-dimensional, pointless character who has no depth to him. I don't want to write any of them. But I also like to push and challenge myself. We have Alexander. Alexander could quite potentially be the most two-dimensional and boring person in the book, because he is very much based on a true, real, existent historical character. But what did I do? I went crazy. I came across the idea that it really has nothing to do with the main narrative of Imperium. This was back before Imperium was even called Imperium, back when it was named after, shall we say, a slightly dodgy white supremacist racist organisation that I didn't know until my mate Laurie very subtly pointed me in the direction of a certain website, and I realised, oh, I can't be advocating this. This doesn't go well for what I want to represent. You learn, don't you? But Alexander could be two-dimensional, because he is essentially the absolute embodiment of the heroic leader. Everything he does, okay, history does point out he made mistakes. History points out that Alexander may well have been a bisexual person, that he may have had mental health issues, that he may have been a bit of a sadist. But we don't know, because we never met him. We only have bits and fragments of history to talk about. So, back to the point of my tangent, in Scanda Draco, I decided, let's see what happens if we take the Alexander of history and drop him unceremoniously, not only into the modern world, but into a very particular and unique aspect of the modern world, which I was living myself, the Dominican Republic and Santo Domingo, as the ultimate outsider and stranger. How would Alexander develop in that, and what aspects that were central to his character would be forced to develop under those circumstances so that he could emerge victorious. And it was actually quite interesting how that developed. It was just an idea, and I wrote the first draft of Skanda Draco in 3 days. And this is a decently sized novella. And what came of it was something I completely did not expect. Why I ended up dropping in other characters who didn't necessarily belong there. And the culmination of it all was, on the eve of the most important part of the story, we have Alexander, now knowing he is Alexander again, waking up and cooking what is considered a traditional Dominican breakfast, which I will tell you involves a very particular form of fairly spicy salami, fried eggs, fried plantain slices, and other things with a variety of sauces and flavourings. He gets up and cooks this for Kaliadis, for Nesha, and for Sham. And they have the time of their lives. They've got royally drunk the night before, knowing what's coming. And it's this small domestic normality. This act of a friend doing something good for his friends, because Alexander himself, because of his biology, his metabolism, is incapable of getting drunk and incapable of feeling a hangover, but his friends have returned, though immortal, in very human bodies and are suffering terrible hangovers. So Alexander thinks, what's the best thing I can do to help them cure their hangover? Good, solid, heavy, greasy breakfast. And that's what he does. But the idea of Skanda Draco was, for me, and that's coming out soon, by the way, I'm re-editing that. There's several changes and improvements that need to be made to that. And it's unfortunately, I apologise, finding the time to do it, because I know people of all the, I suppose, prequels to the Imperium cycle, Skanda Draco is the most anticipated because it's the weirdest. But and it's the oddest premise, but it needs to be honed and perfected in many ways. But it was just the idea of taking these mythological heroes as they were and putting them into our modern world and just seeing how they coped with it. And they coped by behaving like people. There's one scene where they're having Alexander has gone out and bought them all suits, and they're basically acting like one would not imagine overly masculine butch heroes from ancient times behaving. But people are people wherever you put them, and they were basically laughing and taking photos and drinking and commenting on each other's physiques and grooming themselves and everything in preparation for this great event. It was almost as if they were dressing themselves in armour for war, but they were dressing themselves in rather expensive designer suits. And many early beta readers who read this thought, it's awful, it's terrible, but it's absolutely brilliant, because you get to see aspects of these people's characters when they're put in a situation which is not the norm for them, which is not their ground state of being, how they behave. And that is where Skanda Draco came about. It actually became central to the mythology of the Imperium universe, but it was there as an experiment. I was reaching a wall in how to move the Imperium cycle forward, how to develop the characters, which characters to develop and how. And Skanda Draco did it. It broke the deadlock. It was effectively my Gordian knot, and rather than picking it apart and trying to find where it begins like everyone else did, I did as Alexander, took out my sword and cut it asunder and waited to see what the heck would happen with all these unravelling threads. And to be honest, in my opinion, what came out was something quite magical and unique. I don't think I've ever seen anything like Skanda Draco written before, and I don't think I'll write anything like it again, but maybe I will. But that's what I'm talking about. The setting evolves. When I first started, with the Imperium cycle when many years ago, 30 years ago in fact, it turned out to be very dry, similar, and stayed, and too similar to the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and in some ways more similar to what has emerged as a Warhammer 30,000 universe, the Horus Heresy period, which I greatly enjoy, by the way. But it wasn't unique, it didn't have its own life, it didn't have its own identity. Whereas now, talking to my friend Laurie, who's involved in that universe, which is why he's not involved too much in this one, because it's a conflict of interest. It is enough. He can see. He said, "I can see your inspirations. I can see where things are coming from. But it's got its own life. It's got its own feeling. It's got its own spirit. It's unique, and that's what you have to strive for. You can be inspired by other universes. You can be inspired by other inventions and creations. You can be inspired by the real world, which the Imperium is, but you can make it your own very unique thing." And that's the thing with your setting. It goes back to our idea of context in the last episode, and it goes back to my idea of talking about the language in the one before that. Your setting is, in my opinion, the most important thing in your work, in your writing, in any story, because a setting is what creates the dynamics, what creates the changes, what shapes each individual character into what they are at the beginning of the story and what they can evolve into. And the weird thing is, in Imperium, I've left some things. Damn it, I missed it. It was a mosquito. Blooming big mosquito as well. But I'll get it later. But oh, it left. Okay, so the mosquito left out the open window. Good stuff. That is a happy ending to my story just now, because it didn't bite me and suck my blood. But back to the most important thing here, back to the thread of our conversation. In the Imperium universe, my setting has shaped, moved, and formed all of my characters. Each of my character is in their unique bubble when they enter the story. But obviously, as the story begins to develop, these bubbles begin to touch, and as bubbles do, they start to merge. And characters start forming their own bubbles until eventually either the bubble bursts under the pressure of the story, or they merge and you have little universes within the universe. Now, initially when I started expanding Imperium, there were little bubbles. There were the bubble of Alexander and his friends, Sham, Korai, Kaliadis, Nesha, Lupanikis, and Sham. They were in their own little isolated world and universe. And what the novellas did more than the collections did was start to expand that universe out and start bringing other elements and peoples and events into it. It crossed over. It opened doorways. A short story that I had written just as a bit of fun ended up being quite important as a way of crossing the boundaries and bringing characters together. That your setting must always be evolving and changing and open to change. But at the same time, your setting must be consistent, have context, and have some elements of it which will never change, which are static, just like it is in the world today. There are some things that are never going to change. Sometimes that is unfortunate, that these things will not change. But there are other things that will, and that are in constant dynamic flux, or suddenly experience a large shift in paradigm. And these are the things that you have to look out for. These are the things that you have to focus on, the things that you have to not only force and push, but sometimes allow them to happen. Because I'll give you a secret. I've mentioned this before, but Sham was going to appear in the original Trinity series, which has since been amalgamated into Imperium, for a chapter and a half, maybe longer. He was simply going to be there as as essentially the throwaway mentor type character that Gabriel arrives in India after many trials and tribulations with Unity. Unity is not really involved because she's gone into some sort of deep sleep coma, and during that time Sham and Gabriel have conversations in which Sham reveals to Gabriel the secrets of his heritage, the history, blah blah blah. That basically there is, if it were a film, there would be a montage period of them drinking coffee, talking, oh really, oh no, and little flashes of historical events and so on and so forth, and they'll come to and Sham will go, and that is your destiny, young man. And I realise that's absolute rubbish to do because it's been overdone. But what I didn't realise is that Sham would actually take a very dominant role in the story once I let him off of his leash, once I gave him his head. Because, like I said, Sham was there to be, shall we say, an out-of-the-box mentor-type character, wise mentor, magical type person, who is of a different ethnicity to the majority of the characters and therefore wise, which I didn't realise could be taken in a racist sort of form at the time, and I tried to avoid that once I realised it. But then Sham became something quite different. Sham is actually, he's essential to everything. He is behind everything. Every major storyline in Imperium started with Sham. And that's the thing I wanted to lead to and go on to. There's no need, there's no obligation, there is no rule which says every mystery that you present in your setting, in your characters, in your work, there's no rule that every single one of those has to be answered. Because behind Sham there are mysteries, there are elements, there are events, there are organizations, there are characters and people who may or may not get fully explained. There is Unity herself. There is Atara, Apatheon Ataraxias. There is the old man that Sham meets in India before meeting Alexander, and other times during Sham's novella, which is coming. There is the Pilot's College and Gabriel's pilot, who essentially signed up to work for Gabriel for nothing. Why? I'm not going to tell you that yet. It may come out later on. There is also, of course, my favourite trope, which has been used in the Imperium, which people have mocked me for, thank you, Lawrence, of the ancients, the people who came before and left all the technology on the moon for us to decode and discover. Does their origin and their story get spoken about, answered? I'm not going to tell you that either, but probably not, because in our real world, in our genuine world that exists, there's plenty of things that don't get answered. There are plenty of questions that are guessed at and half guessed at and hypothesized and thrown around, and that may never get the answer. The foremost among these is there some great shadowy organization of elites secretly controlling the world? If there were, if there is, if there were truth to that idea, little oiky people like you and me, the peons, the ordinary people, the workadays, the slaves, we're never gonna know. We'll never find out. We can go on message boards, we can produce videos, we can write books. We're not going to get monologued by the grand villain at the end where he'll come along and say, "Yes, Mr. Writer Person, you have discovered my secret, and I shall tell you everything now." Let's be honest, good old Mark Zuckerberg, our great friend, although he was probably not directly involved in this because I'm not important enough for this, I wrote some articles for the Chronicles of Enoch which have a feeling of which and an idea of which is spilling in the personage of Paxi over into the Imperium saga, the idea of cybernetic data infiltration, AI manipulation of people by the data they receive, controlling their data, controlling the people, of subconscious influence, going on from the old CIA and MK Ultra stuff. I wrote an article and posted it on Facebook, and within an hour of posting that article, everything I posted on Facebook was blocked. Within an hour of continuing to try and post things, my account went into Facebook limbo and was completely inaccessible by any means which I attempted. Now, that has not made me some Edward Snowden, Julian Assange type character. You may have noticed I am not some great famous conspiracy theorist of some description, but I was, in my opinion, I said something they didn't like. I was shut down completely and utterly and taken off the airwaves, or at least taken off of their platform. And to this day, I cannot share the URL chroniclesofenoch.com on Instagram. And it affected my ratio, it affected my exposure, everything. It took me, 6 months to recover from that, and I'm still recovering. Because right when that happened, Chronicles of Enoch was blowing up. I got so much traffic, it was unreal. I couldn't keep track of it. I was having to churn out blog articles daily to keep people interested and to keep people coming back because they wanted it. And then Facebook zawammed me, and that was ruined. But I came back. I partook of the flame undying and came back as the phoenix comes back. But it took a while. It took a bit. It took things out of me. And come on, man, as right man, woman, being. Excuse me. You're going to come up against things like that. You're going to get bad reviews. You're going to get You're going to get bad critic. You're going to get critiqued heavily. You're going to get insulted. You're going to get laughed at. You're going to get all kinds of stuff. But you can't give up. If this is your one true and central dream, you can't give up. Me, I am fighting daily, pushing hard as I can to keep both Imperium and Chronicles of Enoch as part of people's interest, to keep people interested in it. And let's be honest, my gains are few and small. But if I gain 2 new people interested in it today, 1 tomorrow, 3 a week from now, I'm still gaining people's interest. And you should focus on the same thing. If you see people on Twitter, on Facebook, gaining thousands of followers in a day, and you gain 1, it's all about scale, to be honest. If you are gaining interest in a slower fashion than them, you're still gaining it. And the fact is, I learned a very valuable lesson from one of my subscribers from my old Chronicles of Enoch channel, or before that even, my old original author channel. When I stopped posting videos for a variety of reasons, I had a variety of issues and problems, he noticed and asked me when they were coming back. It was one person only. But I value and appreciate that one person, because to him, my videos had meaning. That my video blogs, much like this, mattered to him. And that's what you have to focus on. Even if there is only one person who watches your videos without fail, every single time, watches them from beginning to end, and extracts meaning from that video, that one person is a reason for you to keep carrying on and doing it, because you're making a difference to their life. And that's what we get into writing for, to make a difference to people's lives. Probably in a week with episode 4. And I thank you, whether it is one of you, whether it is 10 of you, whether it is 100, whether it is 1,000, whether it is 1,000,000 of you that watch these videos with all my heart and appreciation. And I'll keep on producing these videos just for you. Have a great day, guys. Thank you for watching the Imperium video blog. I will speak to you soon.